Zazel was the first human cannonball, but her last performance was a nightmare. One audience member called it the most horrible accident I've ever witnessed. But let's start from the beginning. In 1860, Rosa Matilda Richter was born in London and straight into the circus. Her mom, Suzanne Richter, was a dancer, while her dad, Ernst Karl Richter, was a prominent talent agent. On top of that, they essentially groomed her for the circus. Following in their footsteps was a matter of when, not if. She was destined to become the famous performer Zazel. She just didn't know it yet. While other kids learned the alphabet, Rosa learned how to perform aerial stunts, trapeze, ballet, and gymnastics. Her parents knew the dangers, but they never called it quits. Instead, they just taught her the best ways to fall, preparing her for her risky future. At the age of 12, Rosa left her family and everything she knew to literally leap into the unknown. Even though she was English, she joined a Japanese acrobatic troupe and toured across Europe. This changed everything. Rosa developed not only her skills, but her reputation as well. Audiences raved over her skill, bravery, and fearlessness. But Rosa wasn't invincible, and she soon learned this the hard way. Amazement turned into horror when Rosa fell during a trapeze performance. This was Rosa's first accident, but it was far from her last. Rosa eventually recovered. Her father, however, never got over it. Rosa didn't perform for a while, and family drama may have been the cause. After the accident, Ernst forbade Rosa from performing, but Suzanne disagreed, and the battle was on. And then came a new problem. William Leonard Hunt was the Great Farini, a notorious daredevil, and the inventor of the human cannonball. It was a dangerous stunt where a performer climbed into a cannonball that shot them dozens of feet into the air. He had the idea and the machine, but still needed the star. It would have to be someone young, small, and light enough to squeeze into the cannon. This is where Rosa comes in. But Farini's reputation preceded him. Rosa's father had already sworn years ago that Farini should never have a dog of mine, much less a daughter, for his dangerous performances. Ernst finally saw the light, but Suzanne still had dollar signs in her eyes. Anyone who heard what Ernst said about Farini was shocked that he allowed one of his daughters to work for the daredevil. Though it turns out he didn't. Ernst signed the contract because Suzanne claimed that Rosa would work for a friend, not his enemy. On top of that, Suzanne swore that Rosa would only be singing and dancing. This soon turned out to be a dangerous lie. In April of 1877, the audience knew they'd witnessed either history in the making or tragedy. Rosa, who now performed under the stage name Zazel, stepped into the spotlight. The audience didn't just notice her red and pink costume. They couldn't help but also notice how young, small, and sweet she was. Then Farini prepared the cannonball. The teenager climbed into the machine and signaled her readiness. The audience did not dare to blink or breathe. The audience saw smoke, a flash of red, and Zazel lying motionless on the net dozens of feet away. They didn't move until the teenager stood up and smiled. Zazel hadn't just survived, she'd just made history, becoming recognized as the first human cannonball. This performance hurled her from the jaws of death and into the arms of fame. But this was only the beginning. Along with her signature cannonball act, Zazel performed dangerous stunts like the high dive and tightrope walking. She even reached heights of nearly 100 feet, 30 meters. Zazel bravely challenged physics, gravity, and death, and she won. It was no wonder she had hordes of fans, including some familiar names. But not all of the attention was positive. Most of this attention was creepy and inappropriate. This is because Zazel had to take off most of her clothing to fit into the canon. This was a big deal in Victorian England. From her earliest performances, many advertisements emphasized her clothing, or lack thereof. One writer even encouraged men to attend multiple performances just to see her most perfect body. But it gets even creepier. After painter George Frederick Watts complimented Zazel as the bravest woman he's ever seen, he went on to share that her form was the most perfect he ever saw. George then had the audacity to ask Zazel to sit for a portrait. It's no wonder that her sister tagged along to prevent any shenanigans. By the way, Zazel performed these stunts during a time when women exercising in private raised eyebrows. And here she was, displaying the peak of human athleticism to massive crowds. The very existence of Zazel challenged norms. The social conservatives didn't take this very well, and the lack of clothes added fuel to the fire. Zazel found herself in the middle, with one side criticizing her for not covering up, while the other side objectified her for the same reason. The circus knew that female performers had to tread carefully and do damage control. In response, the circus promoted their female performers' purity and domesticity. And Zazel had one of the most angelic and pure reputations of them all. Unfortunately, Zazel's life was more complicated behind the scenes. It turns out Zazel signed a deal with the devil. Initially, Zazel had no idea how much Farini was taking advantage of her, but when she found out, things were never the same between them. The truth left Zazel horrified. Farini pocketed the majority of her earnings. She saw this as an injustice and a betrayal. After all, Farini took all of the profits but none of the risks. Understandably, Zazel develops a sassy attitude. The diva even threatened to walk out. In response, Farini secretly plotted against her. It turns out that Farini published declarations that he owned the Zazel Act, and by extension, he owned her. Farini took it even further. Farini committed treachery after Zazel asked for more money. He secretly trained other women to perform the Zazel Act. Basically, Farini assembled an army who were prepared to take her place at a moment's notice. There were so many Zazel copycats, she had to refer to herself as the original Zazel. But she had something that could never be copied: skill. She knew exactly how to hold her body and turn mid-air to land safely onto the net. Unfortunately, Zazel's human cannonball trend has claimed over 30 lives. From the very beginning, many had safety concerns and even protested to ban human cannonballs. One of these protesters included Zazel's father. After separating from an unconcerned Suzanne, he went on a mission. Ernst publicized the countless ways his daughter's and many other human cannonballs' life could end. And he was right. Zazel did everything right during a performance. The circus, on the other hand, not so much. As Zazel flew out of the cannonball, she expected the net to break her landing. It did not. She didn't know that the net had rotted due to heavy use. Zazel fell through and suffered injuries that prevented her from performing. That same year, disaster struck again. After Zazel fell off the trapeze, she expected the net to break her landing. And when Zazel plummeted, she screamed, "I am killed, I am killed." In order to reassure the disturbed audience, the circus owner forced her to do the unthinkable. Within half an hour, the owner forced her to get back in the ring. She finished with bandaged hands and overwhelming anxiety, and the audience ate it up. But others weren't so entertained and criticized the owner. The House of Commons debated a bill that aimed to ban dangerous acrobatics. In other words, they wanted to ban what made Zazel, Zazel. She raged at these interfering men because, quote, "I loved it. They'd just no right to take away me living if I loved it. I was ambitious. I wanted to be great. You see, it was me art." Zazel now faced the loss of her livelihood and purpose. She knew what she had to do. According to the American circus mogul P.T. Barnum, Zazel begged him to take her away. She toured with his circus in Europe and across the United States. Unfortunately, she still wasn't free from Farini. Most believed that she still had to give him a good chunk of her pay. While touring with Barnum, the unfairness of her situation became even clearer compared to her equally legendary co-stars. But there was good news. Zazel got married to George Oscar Starr, one of Barnum's employees. This was great PR, especially for the old-fashioned people who remained wary of female circus performers defying gender norms. Barnum's show was a who's who of the best and the brightest. Zazel was the world's most famous human cannonball. Her co-star, General Tom Thumb, was the world's most famous little person. Everyone already knew that Zazel was talented, but they had no idea just how good she was. Even during Zazel and George's break from the circus, performance still called out to her. But Zazel discovered her passion for something shocking and dangerous. Zazel became obsessed with safety nets. She truly believed they could save lives even beyond the circus ring. And she made it her life's mission to convince everyone. Zazel didn't just write about the potential of safety nets. She showed everyone by casually throwing herself out of tall buildings. The couple dove back into the circus after George got a promotion, and it may have been the biggest mistake of their life. At this point, Zazel had performed her dangerous stunts thousands of times to millions of fans. Sure, she'd had a few accidents, but she always came out on top. Little did Zazel know her luck was about to run out. Zazel's human cannonball act went perfectly, but she also performed on the tight wire. And during one of her performances, balancing at around 40 feet in the air, Zazel tried communicating with her team. But they misinterpreted her signal and adjusted the poles holding the wire up. This caused the wire to fall apart and sent her plummeting to the ground. Zazel landed on her hands and knees. After moving the poles, they could finally pick Zazel up. They made a gruesome discovery. Her body could not straighten. So they had the bright idea of yanking on her shoulders and legs to do it themselves. It gets even worse. The horrified crowd could only watch as they carried a screaming Zazel away. One witness described it as the most horrible accident I ever witnessed, and I have seen a good many accidents in my day. The local doctors could only provide temporary relief for her broken back. In order to treat her back injury, Zazel spent over a year in a full-body cast, suspended from the ceiling. This would have been a living nightmare for anyone, but especially for someone as active as Zazel. Somehow, Zazel remained sweet and patient, but she had to face a devastating reality. After sacrificing her childhood and everything in between for her career, this was the end. Against her will, Zazel retired due to an entirely preventable accident. She was only 31 years old. Zazel brought the circus to new heights, so her downfall was nothing short of a tragedy. After the accident, she was never the same, physically or mentally. But by the time Zazel left the world, everyone remembered her as the first human cannonball. Well, almost everyone. Most sources recognize Zazel as the first human cannonball, but others insist that Ella Zuila and George Loyal, the Australian Marvels, beat her to it by years. While no one can agree on who the first human cannonball was, we can all agree that Zazel was a legend and icon of the circus. Nothing and no one can take that away from her. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel for more videos.